Good evening and welcome everybody to the Sports Psychology Committee's final webinar of the year, titled A Team USA Mental Performance Coaches Experience During the 2020 Summer Olympics. My name is Dr. Michael Saleh, and Dr. Kimberly Wagner and I have the pleasure of hosting Mr. Brian Alexander, who Dr. Wagner will be introducing in just a moment. So as Brian is presenting, you're welcome to enter any questions that you have into the question and answer box at the bottom of your screen. And following his presentation, I will choose some questions for him to answer. And if we don't get to all the questions, you're welcome to email Brian after the webinar, and on his final slide, he will include his contact information. So with that said, take it away, Dr. Wagner.
So we are so excited to welcome Brian Alexander to the SDPA Sports Psychology Committee webinar. So just a brief introduction. Brian is a certified mental performance consultant with the Association for Applied Sports Psychology. He's also the co-founder of the WellU Mental Training app. And prior to pursuing a career as a mental performance coach, he competed with Team USA in the sport of water polo for 8 years. Brian has coached and served the psychological performance needs of athletes at the Olympic, national, professional, collegiate, high school, and junior youth levels of sport. One of his most recent roles was supporting the USA men's national water polo team in their pursuit towards the Olympic Games in Tokyo 2021, which he will be sharing his experience at those Olympic Games here with us tonight. So thank you so much, Brian.
Thank you, Dr. Wagner and Dr. Saleh. It's an honor to be here, and I hope that I can give all the listeners a taste of what the Olympic experience is like from a consultant's point of view. As I was going through and preparing these slides and my presentation, I realized an hour is not enough to everything that we did from the beginning, middle, and end of the entire experience, but I hope to give everybody a really good snapshot. So I'm going to share my slides here. Okay. Here we go. So as Dr. Wagner introduced, I prepared this as kind of an experience into the Tokyo 2021 Games. This was my first Olympic Games as a mental performance consultant, and I have been with the team for a number of years, both as an athlete and now as a mental performance consultant. Just an outline. Really what I did was I realized that my pictures kind of told the story, and I think a lot of story and experience. So I just thought that I'm going to share my insert view through a series of pictures that kind of tell little bits and pieces of the story here. The one in the background even is from the venue of water polo in Tokyo, and you can see just from the look at that everything was marketed and branded towards 2020. And so I think that was one of the first initial interesting psychological components of these Olympic Games. But there's a lot of transference and countertransference aspects of this experience that I went through, and I was constantly working towards being aware of in my role. But it all started, I started working with the team in 2017. So I always say it starts before it starts, and a big component of the Olympic Games is your preparation. It's as important, if not more important, than the games themselves in being psychologically ready, as well as just having your role in place. So we'll go through the Pan American Games qualification, the Olympic pandemic year, and that process a little bit. Finally, the selection of the team and how the last cuts are made a couple months prior to the games and how that impacted the team. And then the pivot point in terms of the theme emerging for these games, within our team and within the entire Team USA delegation. And then the challenges of virtual consulting as COVID hit, as I'm sure a lot of the listeners are aware, and telehealth and teleconsulting, but just how that impacted our strategy and process. And then finally, as the games carried on and the world started to take notice of the impact that a number of things have been making on people's mental health, they realized that athletes were immune as well. And there's a short little piece of that I experienced personally, both virtually and then when I entered the games environment. And then I'll share more about this, but I actually arrived midway through the Olympic tournament for our team. So there was a challenge in terms of integration into the team and into the culture and the climate that the team was experiencing. But the pressure and the stress on the world stage is thick, and it's pretty interesting to see it from both a viewer's point of view here at home, watching on NBC and following through social media, and then getting there to the actual environment and seeing what the atmosphere is like. But the magnitude of the operation is unbelievable. It's hard to describe how much work went into these Olympic Games from the Japanese community and people and delegation and the International Olympic Committee, and even just each delegation, the Olympic committees from each country. It's amazing to see. And then we'll finish up with some growth opportunities and learning moments. So a little bit about my background, Dr. Wagner already shared. I have a bachelor's in psychology. I played water polo and also graduated from UC Santa Barbara. And then I went into my athletic career directly from I actually didn't finish my last finals and before I went and played professionally in my first year in Spain. And then I came back for a week and finished my final, the rest of my season professionally in Spain. But once I finished my playing career, I went back to school, have a master's in sports psychology from John F. Kennedy. I earned the CMPC accreditation from AASP, and then I've gone on to become the mental skills coach for UC San Diego, as well as co-found a mental training program and platform through an application called WellU Mental Training. And then I've also worked towards becoming the first mental coach for the Olympic Development Pipeline Program, the USA Water Polo. So it's an entire national governing body, and trying to integrate mental skills training and mental health resources throughout the entire organization, not just the men's senior national team. So that's a little bit about me. Let's talk about the Olympic Games a little bit more. Like I said, it starts before it starts. And for me, this picture in particular is really significant. I was an athlete on this same team, and full circle for me now, I was working with the team, which brought up a lot of challenges ethically, I think, in terms of my own awareness and just navigating the path. But in this picture, the person standing directly in front of me, and this is from our coach orientation at the Pan American Games in Lima, Peru in 2019. The person standing in front of me there was my sports psychologist when I played. And he actually was working alongside of me now with our women's national team, along with a few other Team USA teams in a lot of the same events. And while this wasn't the first year I worked with Team USA, this was the largest event that I had been to in my new role. And I had played in a Pan American Games before. I'd played in World Championships as an athlete, but I really was oblivious to everything that went beyond behind the scenes in order to make these things work, make them run, the stress that the coaches went through, just the stress that everybody else actually endured in Pan American Games for water polo is the Olympic qualifier. So we were there to actually qualify for the Olympic Games, and that's it's a North and South American event, but we had actually lost to our main competitors, Brazil and Canada, who was on the rise earlier that same year. So we were really facing a challenge that we thought we weren't even sure if we were going to make the Olympic Games. We had to win this tournament in order to qualify. But I leaned heavily on Dr. Peter Haberl, who's pictured there. And, I think in this role, it's so important to seek peer support because it can be so isolating and so challenging, especially when you're on the road and you're that consultant and you're that person that, people not sure if they want to talk to you. The coach is not sure if they want to talk to you, right? So you're trying to play this middle ground as well as find your space. So to me, it's always quite interesting to figure out where do I stand, even where do I position myself on the bus? How do I interact in timing with coaches and athletes as they prepare for games, as we have days of just training between games. And then as things come up and challenges arise, who do I turn to? So we started to really support one another. And I thought it was pretty amazing that I went from psychologist and athlete role with Dr. Haverl to then peer-to-peer role in how we supported one another through our own experiences. The operation in Lima itself was pretty substantial. As you can see here, this is the athlete village in the Pan American Games. And the challenge, the same thing with the Olympic Games, was I was staying about a 45-minute bus ride away from the athletes in the actual town of Lima, because the athletic village was outside of the city. And so I had to add on an extra 45 minutes to even an hour of bus time at the beginning of the day and at the end of the day. So you can imagine how challenging that is for self-care, to figure out what you do during that downtime in the day when everybody wants to take a nap at the village. You don't have any space, where to go, and what to do. So it's always navigating these challenges on the road, as well as staying professional and in your role, and then realizing these are grueling days and challenging days, but I find a lot of joy in them because I love what I do. So it's a little bit of give and take there, but I think that's part of the discovery process in this whole thing. The venue there was quite nice as well, and being in a third world country, essentially, you definitely see the discrepancy in socioeconomic status. All these venues, I didn't show the outside, but they were in pretty poor neighborhoods. So we felt like it was pretty fortunate to be able to experience this. I thought it would be useful. This is the day of our gold medal match, to just share a little bit of the energy as we entered. So we're right here. This video is of us with the entire water polo team on this bus, passing another bus of the USA softball team, whose venue was right next to ours. And we were entering to play Canada for the gold medal on this day. And the women's softball team had just won their gold medal at the Pan American Games. So I thought I'd play this, and I hope it's optimized for sound, so that you can really get a good idea of how it sounds. So give me, Dr. Wagner, would you give me a thumbs up if the sound's playing when I push play?
Yes.
No?
Unfortunately, we can't hear the sound.
Okay, well, you could sort of see that we're passing this bus. We had no idea that they were going to be on the bus right next to us. And there was a lot of tension, a lot of stress on our bus going into this gold medal game to qualify for the Olympics. And then we pull up and there's the USA softball team who had just won the gold, cheering us on with their gold medals. And it was like an amazing experience for all of us. And immediately that climate and that contagion factor kicked in, and it was pretty special. I mean, I just kind of get goosebumps right now thinking about that moment. And I think that another key point here is that there is a real pride when you're at these events in Team USA, but there's a real emphasis on winning at all, as in terms of what everybody celebrates. And our team, while we were supposed to win and qualify for the Olympics at the Pan American Games, at the actual Olympic Games, I think we were seeded 9th going in out of 12 teams. And in the previous Olympic Games in Rio in 2016, we had finished 11th. So there's a lot of challenge, I think, that these athletes face in terms of the expectation, not only from Team USA, the delegation, but also just people back home and not really understanding what it's like in a sport like this, representing a country like USA with all that expectations, extra stress. And it's not even just once you get there, it's being a member and all the time and making it through these different hurdles. So now we enter a COVID year. And I think this year was just an opportunity and a challenge, and we all experienced it differently. But one of the things that was really interesting in the way that we experienced it was we were actually at training. I think it was somewhere around like March 19th. And a lot of our guys follow the NBA pretty closely. And they had seen Rudy Gobert, the announcement that Rudy Gobert had tested positive for COVID-19, and then how it impacted the entire NBA through that one game. And then we came back finally realizing this is a real thing, and there's going to be a strong trickle down effect from all these professional sports to potentially the Olympic Games. We weren't really sure what to do. And the coach finally, who's our coach, is from Serbia. So there's a cultural difference in beliefs and mentality around these types of situations. He finally decided to cancel training in March of the Olympic year. And our national governing body, USA Water Polo, was kind of put on hold, and just like the rest of the world. But I thought we did a really nice job over time of pivoting towards virtual. And I don't know if any of the audience had followed along with other sports teams, but our team did a really nice job of staying consistently together through Zoom and doing training on Zoom, weight training. Our actual strength conditioning coach traveled to different places around. A lot of our players are from California. So we actually traveled and brought them equipment all up and down California. And then we would hold weekly Zooms for weights. We'd hold, I think I did about 17 to 20 Zooms throughout the year of 2020, just mental training sessions in a row. And we eventually evolved it to getting really creative. And at one point we used it effectively in terms of growing and understanding one another and understanding the commitment that we all had towards the team. But we did some fun things, like a couple of the guys had special interests in different topics, whether it be investing or it was in epidemiology or different topics. So we actually had them present, as volunteers, even in the stock market. And so our guys got to learn a lot about each other in ways that they otherwise would have had no idea. So I thought that was really neat. But the point was, we were working towards staying home, staying healthy, as you know, USA Water Polo sort of put a campaign around through social media, but finding ways to find our power in an otherwise powerless situation, and really kind of stick together. Eventually, through the entire year, our coach, we couldn't find a pool. Especially as things started opening, there was just no one, because we were training at satellite locations at high schools and different things like that. So we couldn't access a pool. So finally, our coach was able to secure professional contracts in Europe. And this was, I think, in July of 2020. And the season start early September. And the games were already postponed, which was in itself a challenge, whether or not they were going to be canceled or postponed. But it was quick. It was a quick turnaround. We had about 19 guys out of our 23-man roster go to play in different countries in Europe. We actually even got an NCAA waiver for the guys that still had eligibility to go play in these professional leagues and get this experience because of the Olympic Games. So it was pretty interesting to see all that happen so quickly. Eventually, we did get back on the road, and this is me in Greece in a pool called Olympiakos in Athens, Greece. We ended up going again in the beginning, it might have been the end of 2020, somewhere in November. But we started traveling again with a lot of regulations, and we had a suitcase full of antigen tests and our athletic trainer, and we travel a doctor. They would test us right there on the pool deck, and we really had to make a lot of adjustments to make it work. But that ability to find solutions, I think, was the key towards our success, and being able to have conversations around these kinds of topics as a team and with individuals and with staff as a collective unit was really important. And I think, it takes a village to be successful. So we've had a lot of great people involved in just collaborative nature. So moving forward, and like I said, I really don't think that I can cover everything in the short amount of time. I mean, there's so much detail that I could go into with all these things, but I think giving you a snapshot is really useful, and hopefully you're painting a story here. So it's interesting with the Olympic Games. These teams, these dreams these athletes have, they're realized right towards the very end. And so everybody back home is put on hold in terms of your support team and your family and whether or not you're going. Our team, our actual Olympic team, while our team as a whole was already qualified, we maintained that qualification from the 2019 Pan American Games. The actual selection of the team gets kind of whittled down until a month or two before the team travels to the games. And so this group shown here on the right, they're really grew together. And this was after our last game in a tournament right before. This was in Georgia, in the country of Georgia, Tbilisi, Georgia, where we had finished second in this tournament. We're feeling pretty good about our team, but you can see there's two players there that were still clothed, and they had just found out that they were the last two cuts of the team, the alternates. And it's a very, very challenging moment, and in that night, even in the hotel, lots of tears are shed, and it's a real challenge to know how to be available as a consultant and how to support these athletes, because they're all different. But I think that it was very interesting for me from a performance point of view that at this tournament we had been working with them for about 5 years now. I feel like I finally knew how to connect with each person individually pre-game if needed, the space they needed and the space they didn't need, we developed a lot of cue words or mantras, and it was unique for all 15 guys that are pictured here. And I knew, who needed the connection or the check-in more after the game versus the ones that didn't. And we had a leadership team within the group. But I think what evolved and what developed was this mission and this idea of becoming the best brand of brothers the world has ever seen in the sport of water polo. And there's a lot of goals connected to that, but the guys actually came up with this. And I thought it was really unique because, I was an athlete on this team, and we had really never set aside time to create this kind of dynamic. And there's even questions in my mind if we were too close, if the social was too tight and interfering with the task. But you can see here, on the left, I constantly was finding times to integrate the research. And there I'm reading an article called "The Rocky Road to the Top." The research and the evidence-based piece with the application and learning how to integrate the sports psychology theory and different studies into the team. And I think finally in this moment we arrived. So this was the moment when I was ending my time with the team before they traveled with the Olympic Games. And the reason why I say that is there was a challenge in terms of the credentialing process. And I pictured this here because the Olympic Games, the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee allocated only a certain number of credentials per delegation. And our coaching staff, team manager, obviously the medical doctor in this Olympic Games got a credential to enter, our athletic trainer, but I had to wait until other sports finished in Tokyo, and then I could go. So I was able to go. I flew over July 31st, and the games started July 17th. Or sorry, July 23rd. Our team had actually gone to Hawaii for pre-training with Australia's men's water polo team a week prior, but they planned to go to Tokyo from there. However, Hawaii had canceled all their flights to Tokyo after we had booked ours. So the travel was really difficult. Our team actually took a red eye to San Francisco and then turned around after a 4-hour layover to fly direct from San Francisco to Tokyo, land in Tokyo, and the wait time in the Tokyo airport was 9 hours for processing, checking the paperwork. And we had to have about 9 apps for contact tracing, for all this vaccine testing, you name it. And we actually needed to buy 6-foot-long chargers for our phones so that if there was a positive test, then our phones wouldn't trace, the proximity within 6 feet to another phone, which would then red flag that athlete, and their games would essentially be over. It was a very big challenge, and this is our doctor here, our team doctor that has actually been with us for a lot of years. But he was our COVID liaison officer and the one that was essentially in charge of all these operations. We tested every single morning, and we had to get our little spit vial in by a certain time. So you can imagine the stress that was there for the athletes and the coaches. But as we prepared, we developed these themes. And so the preparation was, how can we prepare ourselves for all these things that we can't control, but we know are going to be there. So we started to really talk a lot about resilience and finding our expertise with uncertainty and kind of building it around these things that we could take action on, which was poise, meaning like calm and composure and being like the eye of the hurricane. Persistence, which was pushing towards our goals, making the main thing in our mind as we work through these challenges and adversity. And then finally practicing presence. And we had a large mindfulness component built into our training, as well as learning how to navigate the difficulties of seeking results, being uncertain with what's going to happen today or the next day, as well as working through the past and you know, whether it just be the normal performance challenges or additional challenges, they were all there. And you know, mental health became a big topic, and obviously a big challenge with a lot of athletes, namely, you know, Simone Biles was the headliner there. But the United States Olympic and Paralympic Committee had actually hired a team of mental health officers before these games, headed up by Dr. Jessica Bartlett. And before, you know, as COVID came around and they were instilling this program within the USLPC, they were already calling it the Mental Health Olympics. So the writing was on the wall, and we worked through it. Once I arrived, I actually didn't have a full credential. So I arrived and I was working towards integrating into the team, but I had to kill a couple days before I could get my credential to even enter the athlete village. But I did have a partial to go into the aquatics arena, which is the one you see here in the picture. So wishing I could share audio, but let's go to the next slide. You won't be able to hear this, but you can see it. This is a video in the aquatics arena, which is one of the, I mean, it's a huge venue. These venues are beautiful. They did a really nice job. But as you can see, as I play it, you can see all the signage that just says Tokyo 2020. So we're like in the twilight zone in the previous year, but there's no crowd. It's a huge arena. This is the 50 freestyle final. So this is Caleb Dressel's final swim. And really the atmosphere is something that was kind of challenging for a lot of athletes. Even in the, you know, in these larger arenas, there was a little bit more with the music and with the media that were there. And then the other athletes were able to go attend from that same discipline. You couldn't cross over, like a swimmer couldn't go to the track and field. You had to stay within your own venue. And, you know, it just kind of added another challenge in terms of those athletes who really thrive off of the energy of the crowd, or can, you know, are having a challenge with performance, and then they're able to turn it around and feed off of something external. You had to manufacture that internally or just within your own team, which was a challenge. So once I finally gained entry into the athlete village, this is me with my full credential on day one. I had to really figure out, you know, how am I going to integrate with this team that's already halfway through the tournament and they're getting mixed results. Luckily, our team had won the first game, which was one of our first goals, and which was the most important game against the host country, Japan. The way it works is that there's 2 brackets of 6 teams, and the top 4 advance to the quarterfinals. So that was a really important game for us. And then we beat the South African team the second game. But then we lost a series of 3 games, and it was challenging for our guys to maintain that persistence. And when I entered, I noticed there was just a different climate. I mean, different than the way I left them in Georgia. I had met with them once virtually when they were in Hawaii, and it seemed like everything was working in this right direction. But you could just felt it. The atmosphere was just dripping thick with pressure and stress, and I didn't really know what had happened. The coaches also kind of were isolating a little bit more, and there was challenges in terms of communication through just some of the normal social things that I think we take for granted. But as I entered, I didn't necessarily want to come in and be the savior either. I needed to figure out what was going on, and if I could help, and then if I could help, how. So there's a lot of challenges there in terms of entering a team atmosphere and working within your role, maintaining boundaries and privacy and confidentiality. And I had already known that there was another challenge within our team with the way that the players were having one. They changed the rules. We traveled 13 athletes, but each game one athlete would have to sit out. And we didn't know this, but the first game was scheduled for the day after the opening ceremonies, but our coaches had to designate a roster for that game, which then meant the player that was sitting out was not actually listed as an athlete on our team and could not walk in the opening ceremonies. And this was a big challenge, I think, because the athlete was a veteran on our team, and it just turned into a carryover, a snowball effect throughout the games for him. So I had already been working virtually through the first week of the games, but just kind of learning with boots on the ground what it was like was a whole nother picture. And it was pretty interesting as well to see the image that the media portrays and NBC and social media when you're home, compared to now we're in Japan, we're in Tokyo, we're seeing the machine, that they've built work, but without a lot of the extra normal distraction with family and fans, but with additional distraction of COVID protocols and different things like that. So this is a little bit of what it looked like in the Olympic Village for these athletes. This first picture I put in because you can sort of see in the dining hall, in the dining commons, we were separated by plastic, all three sides. You're kind of, it's a huge, massive dining hall, 2 stories. I mean, food from everywhere. It's amazing, but you can't talk because you got this plastic between you, and you have, so you're sitting there with your team and you can't even have a conversation. You can't hear somebody across from you with this plastic. It was pretty interesting, the social dynamics that could play. Here we're walking up through the village, then each delegation has their buildings decorated, and here's the American building with flags all around, and you can imagine, all the athletes walking through the village, and all the professional basketball players, the gymnasts, all the stars, and you're trying to focus. And water polo is actually the longest sport. I think volleyball is right there too. It goes throughout the entire 2 weeks of the Olympic Games. So you play every other day, and then on the off days you have a training schedule. It was also quite hot. It was quite humid, and there's different challenges there as well. The other thing was, yes, the beds were made out of cardboard, and they weren't terribly uncomfortable, and I think a lot of the athletes were able to adjust their beds. But it's pretty interesting. As we all know, sleep is such an important factor in terms of performance, and so we had to make adjustments and just accept things that the way they were and things we couldn't control. And then lastly, I thought this was really neat. In each room, this is a picture I took from one of our suites in the athlete village. The delegation had actually, the USOPC had actually had handwritten notes to the athletes from kids back home or from around the world, just trying to inspire them and give them well wishes and inspiration. So I thought it was pretty interesting to see kind of what the daily life is like for an Olympic athlete and sort of integrate myself within that. But again, just like in Lima, I was not living in the athlete village. I was living in a hotel outside of the athlete village, traveling in, adding an extra half hour in the morning and the evening, and trying to find ways to understand the schedule, understand the flow of the athletes, when they find it useful for meetings and whatnot, and also kind of, you know, the challenge with the dining hall is that's what I found is one of the best meeting places of all, because there's a ton of quiet corners. It's a huge space, but in this case, we actually couldn't use it too often because of all the COVID protocols. So a lot of adaptation was used here. So on that same topic, here's a couple of additional pictures that I thought were interesting. One on the right, this is from the dining hall as well, but they're actually encouraging you not to talk in this signage that's right in front of your face on that plastic. So it was everywhere. And the USOPC had created these meeting rooms in that tower, and this is one of them. So they're kind of hidden in a way, and you had to kind of gain entry through the athletes. So if they wanted you to know, then they would invite you in, and I was able to get in there. And I think that shows a lot of the trust and rapport that we built, but being able to do it in a way where it's private and you can maintain those boundaries from even the coaching staff if needed. That was part of the challenge. Additionally, as the days wear on, I think it's always important to stay active, to use the facility, the weight room. For me, I'm a swimmer too, so I was able to get in the pool and swim a little bit during practice times. But then get really creative with how you use your role in a positive and productive way. So I just find that each venue is unique, and it kind of requires an open mind to kind of integrate while knowing your team and kind of tracking their progress and assessing different needs. Not only from the athletes, but also from the coaches as well, and the staff, the additional staff too. As the games wore on towards the end, the media was quite interesting as the Simone Biles story came out, and everybody kind of tracked her progress through the games towards actually returning and competing. We saw the media was picking up on this aspect of mental training, mental health. And one morning, I don't know why, we had to have our phones turned on. I got a call from an unlisted number, and it turned out to be the New York Times. And they didn't even know I was in Tokyo. But they did a training piece, a piece on mental training for athletes. And I just thought it was so interesting. The Olympic Games, especially in the sport of water polo, brings out everybody from the woodwork. And the pressure that brings is something else. It's really interesting. But when it's over, everything kind of disappears until that next Olympic year. And that's where there's a real challenge in terms of what they call the post-Olympic blues. You feel like you're on cloud nine, and even in this venue, right? You can see here, there's no fans in the stands, but this is our last game of the Olympic Games. It's pretty interesting to see the highs and the lows of this experience, and to really, see it from an outsider's point of view, and then to get inside and then experience it yourself and have a little bit of that transfer onto you, and being aware of it and knowing kind of what's going on. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Whether or not to actually do the interview was in my mind, but this was an opportunity, I think, for the field, and it actually worked out great. I was positioned next to some amazing people in the field in this article, that we were just talking about the aspects of mental training, and I think that's great to get it out there. So as we wrapped up, our team finished 6th in the tournament, which was a marked improvement over the last of the games. Definitely not our goal in terms of what we had hoped to accomplish, but I think that this team put a mark on USA men's water polo as a whole. And while they were not, they didn't really find that they had accomplished everything, there is a sense of satisfaction in the progress that we have made. And the players that are leaving felt like they left a mark and a legacy, and the ones that are carrying on are willing to carry that torch towards the future. One of the things that I didn't expect to happen was I received this certificate in the mail, not certification, certificate in the mail from the USOPC, which I thought was a nice touch, something that you can frame and put on the wall from the experience of being a support member towards Team USA at the Olympic Games. We'll continue to grow. There's a debrief process, lots of exit interviews through the national governing body. Our coach just signed a new contract, so we're actually starting a new training camp in a week. And I think I'm going to keep going. I'm not 100% sure, but Paris is about 3 years away instead of 4. And I think that does actually make a big difference for the athletes as well as for the staff. So yeah, we're moving forward now and learning a lot in the process. Thank you all so much. I'd love to answer your questions now, and I really appreciate you guys listening in, and hopefully you got the story and were able to gain a little bit of the experience there.
Brian, thank you so much. That was really fascinating. And I mean, I don't know, there's no one better to give the audience unique insights into what the games were like. I thought it was really interesting. I have no doubt that it was really helpful to the audience as well. So we have a question from Molly. What were some common psychological challenges athletes faced that you supported them with?
Common psychological challenges, I think it ranged from just performance nerves to confidence. With a few individual athletes that had better relationships than with others in terms of the longevity of consultation. And so there were a few instances where we had to really unpack some of their history in terms of the Olympic Games and use imagery quite often, and then build that into this Olympic Games, previewing the environment, their new role, because it had evolved as they had evolved as athletes and as members of the team. And then there's also a big cultural component, team building and team chartering and putting things actually on paper rather than just talking about them and sticking with them and coming back to them. And I thought that was also a big component to this work too.
Awesome. And as you talked about helping the athletes manage their mental well-being, could you remind us of that acronym that you used? You mentioned something like practice perseverance. I noticed some like really nice, succinct catch, some phrases that you used. Do you mind reminding the audience of those?
Maybe that was where I was talking about poise, persistence, and presence.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's kind of actually, I think that's built off of some resilience work by, I think his name's Richardson. And he talked about some of the challenges and definitely some of the ways that undermine resilience in terms of personalization, pervasiveness, and permanence. And how if we build an awareness around those things permeating kind of our appraisal process, then we can have the option to adjust. And I actually built acronyms around that too. We did a book review of the New Zealand All Blacks a couple years prior to the Olympics, and it was called Legacy. And they used the OODA acronym: Observe, Orient, Decide, Act. And I adjusted it to ADA, which was acknowledge, accept, decide, and act. And so we use that in terms of making adjustments and adaptations to evolve our resilience to all these challenges with COVID and just in performance as well.
Awesome. Question here. What would you say was the most important lesson that you took away from this experience personally?
Yeah, the most important, that's a hard question actually, because there's so many.
I'll take credit for that, so
yeah,
you could blame me for that one.
Yeah, thanks. No, it's fine. It is a good question. I think, there's a big challenge for me, and I was always wary of it working within the sport that I played, as well as the team that I played on, in having this challenge, and I did a lot of self work, before I even worked with Team USA. But I couldn't deny that it was there as I actually went to the Olympic Games, because I was actually an alternate for 2 Olympic Games. So that means I was one of those 2 last guys cut. And so this transference and countertransference piece was big for me, and learning how to navigate that through the experience and through the peer support of Dr. Haberl and a lot of other people as well internationally. I think I didn't share this, but one day we all met in the Olympic Village, all the other sports psychology consultants from other countries. We met one morning as the International Olympic Committee's SIG, which is Special Interest Group, which is pretty cool to just connect with them and see what their experiences were like. And so I think that was probably the biggest learning moment.
Right on. We have a question from Sean. With the mental health epidemic amongst youth, what aspects of sports psychology could be useful to help everyday kids combat anxiety?
With youth, I think the biggest one is probably having support networks in place, but learning the power of breathing and how that integrates with things that they do, as well as just a daily routine, and whether that be breathing to learn how to breathe like a ratio breath, or mindfulness meditation, and just experiencing that relaxation response, and experiencing that. I was using this other kind of mantra, clarity over confusion, finding the clarity over confusion as you move out of that fight, flight, or freeze state and into more of that calm, composed decision-making mind. So I'd say that, to be honest. I mean, it doesn't need to be complicated, but it's a complex thing that we're working with.
So yeah, sometimes just keeping things simple, basic, not trying to do too much seems to be very helpful. We have another question from Noah. What would you say is the most difficult part of your job?
It's got to be integrating with the coaches. I found that working through the coaches is one of the most impactful ways to be a successful consultant when we're speaking the same language, but it's challenging, especially with a coaching staff that has a lot of experience even in a sport where they kind of know me, and I was trying to reinvent myself with them from an athlete to a consultant in a different role. But there's also the cultural differences that we went through. We had, a Serbian coach, an assistant coach who's American, Cuban American, and then another assistant coach who was actually an Olympian as well on this team previously. So there was just a lot of challenge in terms of just getting the buy-in, but I was always jockeying for position with, okay, here's the schedule for the next couple of days. Where are the little gaps? How does this fit in? Can I put a mental training meeting in there? That's kind of how it went. And then also trying to collaborate with them as well, and share enough and integrate them enough, and then get the athletes to then see the value in including the coaches in some sessions, but not all sessions, and just that dynamic. So I think that was probably it.
Annette has a question. First of all, she started with Brian, terrific presentation. She is wondering if you personally are continuing to play water polo.
Yes, I do at a master's level. But I did make a little bit of a rule with myself that I'd never play against someone who I was working with or potentially in the future with.
Are there, do you have a go-to mental skill or some mental skills that you use for yourself if you face some adversity in the pool?
Oh my goodness, all the time. Honestly, I think that one of the best ways to understand them is to practice them on yourself. So I play water polo, but I also play tennis now, and I'm constantly working on my between points routine, my ability to use my breath with my movement, using my breath between points, but then also using my self-taught cues to direct my focus to sort of shift my attention from internal to external, to narrow in on targets. I mean, like a ton of stuff, but kind of building it into knowing myself as well, which I think is the real art in it. Knowing how to coach myself through that, and then even lean on other people that are willing to coach me as well.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that's the best. I mean, even in clinical work, you have to practice what you preach. So it's cool to hear your personal experience with that. We're just about at time. I'll leave maybe like a little bit of maybe 10 seconds if anyone has any last minute questions, and then otherwise, Dr. Wagner will wrap things up.
Brian, I was just going to ask, do you think that your background in playing water polo helped you to get the players and the coaches to not only build rapport with them, but also to buy into what it is that you were working with them on? Do you think that helped, that you had that background?
Definitely. It definitely gets my foot in the door. I just clicked forward to a slide, but it's a blessing and a curse in itself. I mean, even in, had the way that everybody in the delegation sees you. I didn't show this, but at the end of the 2019, the Pan American Games, the Olympic Committee sends out a newsletter to thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people. And on the cover of this newsletter was USA Men's Water Polo advances to the Olympic Games. And there's a picture of me when I was playing as the photo. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is against everything that you're supposed to do and represent as a consultant. And there I am. So I think I realized after a while that hiding, like the idea of hiding in the shadows, and being a support person was really tough. Not only that, but I'm kind of a big person too. So I think I think it got my foot in the door, but it has its challenges. You know, it definitely has its challenges.
Yeah, I could see how it could help, but it could also maybe hurt at times as well, make it more challenging.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right, well, I didn't see any other questions come in. I hope that I didn't miss anybody, but I do just want to say, Brian, thank you so much. It's not every day that we get the opportunity to hear from and to pick the brain of a sports psychologist working with an Olympic team and hearing what the challenges of the athletes were, particularly this Olympics with COVID and the additional challenges that presented, but also the ways in which you were able to support them. You gave us a lot of really good information tonight, and thank you again so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you, Dr. Wagner, and thank you to everybody that listened.